Welcome to the Fictitious Dark podcast, where we explore the lines between truth and the fictitious. And on this episode, we're covering St. Patrick's Day and leprechauns. So, happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone. And I suppose leprechauns you could call like the Irish cryptid in a way. There's lots of accounts of people having all sorts of folklore around leprechauns and sightings and that kind of stuff. So I'd say leprechauns count as some type of cryptid. So we're just going to explore those lines of leprechauns mainly, a little bit of St. Patrick's Day stuff, and just get into it. This time around, Rick was definitely able to do much more research than myself, so he might be talking more, but I'm sure I'll interrupt him plenty. But I was able to cover a little bit, so I'll pass it over to Rick to get into whatever first thing he wants to when it comes to leprechauns.
I think the easiest thing to start out with leprechauns is just talk about the definition that's in the encyclopedia. Leprechaun in Irish folklore is a fairy in the form of a tiny man, often with a cocked hat and a leather apron. Solitary by nature, he is said to live in remote places and make shoes and brogues. The sound of his hammering betrays his presence. He possesses a hidden crock of gold. If captured, threatened with bodily violence, he might, if his captor keeps his eyes on him, reveal its hiding place. But usually the captor is tricked into glancing away, and the fairy vanishes. That's typically what I know from like a typical leprechaun, is that they have a crock of gold, usually at the end of a rainbow, and you can somehow try to talk him into it. But if you don't keep your eyes on him, he's able to disappear and get out.
Do we know why, like, what's the rainbow specifically? Do we know anything about that?
I didn't find anything on the research about the rainbow. I'm sure that it's probably from, like, an old folktale or a story that, that didn't come up on any of the research that I found. But,
one thing, and I don't know, like, this is just me guessing. Yeah. As far as a lot of stuff when it comes to just fairy tales and different cultures and stuff, rainbows I feel like are commonly referred to as like the bridge between like dimensions and realms. Mm-hmm. I mean, literally, what is it in the Marvel movies? There's the Rainbow Bridge with the Thor movies and stuff.
Yeah.
I do recall there's some rainbow stuff with Nordic stuff. I just don't remember really much. And like when it comes to leprechauns being like, a lot of it's talk about like leprechauns are like part of the Fae and stuff. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to the Fae, that's a whole thing. We'll have to have a different episode that's just focused on the Fae. It is so much stuff, so forgive us for not getting super into the Fae, even though they deserve it. The Fae is like in Irish, I mean, it's more than just Ireland, but like a lot of it, Ireland. Mm-hmm. The Fae is like ancient spirits pretty much, but like the way they talk about them and everything is they talk about them being like of a different realm. And these different realms used to be like coincide with our realm and everything. But then, certain things happen. There's all sorts of different stuff when it comes to the relationship between the Fae and humanity and everything. Mm-hmm. But either way, they talk about them being like from a different realm, this realm that you can't see, that is among us and everything. Yeah. So maybe, I guess, if a leprechaun is technically a Fae and the rainbow is a bridge, it's like it's a bridge between the realms of the Fae and our world. And that's why just on the other side, it's the gold and then the leprechaun.
Maybe the gold is the entrance to the Fae's realm. It's not like actual gold, you know.
Maybe, yeah. One thing also to question is like if we're going on the broad scale spectrum of kind of every culture,
Hmm.
you want to compare stuff. Gold is often associated with demons and spiritual things.
Yeah.
Uh, Gold is very specifically like a jinn thing and being
Hmm.
attached to like lamps and different gold objects. So it's like, what if the leprechaun is like a jinn and he's attached to his gold
Possibly.
and like because he's a spiritual being of sorts, that's why he's able to do magic and disappear and like all this stuff and then you want to get into that even more. Genies with the jinn being attached to the lanterns and whatnot,
Yeah.
granting wishes. Leprechauns grant wishes. Like
Exactly.
leprechauns do tricks and whatnot. They'll make deals with you. That
Yeah.
is totally like jinn and
Yeah.
genies and stuff like that. So there's
Get
just
further with the gold, there's multiple cultures that leave like gold coins over, their eyes to enter the afterlife, just in case they need it.
yeah, yeah, and like specifically, I know with a lot of them, it's like I don't know about every single culture when it comes to the gold over the eyes and whatnot,
Yeah.
but I've just heard of a lot where it's about they need that gold to pay for their passage, to
Yeah.
pay for a guide to get
Yeah.
to the afterlife. So it's like the whole idea of this realm of the Fae
Hmm.
or the Jinn or whatever different folklore spiritual beings. They usually talk about this realm being like in between worlds.
Yeah.
So the idea of our world, this realm that we can't see that's kind of here, and then maybe another spiritual world for like Christianity would be like heaven and everything.
Yeah.
But that being like the in between, so you gotta pay for these other entities to either guide you to heaven or allow you to cross and go to the other side.
Yeah. It's
So
it's an interesting take. Are they leprechauns? Maybe our souls like farrier to get us, to one side or the other.
yeah, so it's I don't know. I mean, I'm already like
Yeah.
mixing up all the different cultures and everything. I can't help
Exactly.
it, but there's just
It's always go ahead.
always just these commonalities in every single culture and these
Exactly what I was gonna say.
ideas and like stuff where it's just like this is not a coincidence that just everybody came up with a different variation of the same thing. And it's like, oh, did they just do that because of their imagination? Or
Yeah.
was there something more that used to be? And for whatever reason, I mean, when it comes to the Fae, you could argue that the Fae is still around because it's a different realm that you can't see. So,
And these cultures had like no bearing of being even close to each other.
yeah, we're
There
talking
was like
Middle East and Ireland. What do
yeah,
they have in common?
yeah, and what was it up till maybe like 50, 60 years ago, most people didn't even get within like a few miles or even before cars were invented, to be more exact. People didn't even get a few miles away from their house.
Exactly. So we're this modern day we're way more connected than
Yeah.
like ever. And yet we look at history and it seems like once upon a time we used to be even more connected.
Hmm.
So, I mean, you could just take that to pretty much every theory when it comes to the dawn of man, whether that was the Christian belief or the evolution belief. We did all kind of originate in one spot and then spread out.
Yeah,
So you could just argue that, but
definitely. But to argue against it is that we have all these different civilizations on basically every continent of the world, and there are literal pyramids on each continent of the world with like hieroglyphics showing things that that are pretty modern, but maybe they're used to represent other things. But why would they make a picture to represent a flying saucer or a helicopter, for example,
Yeah.
that we've seen? To continue on the path of Leprechaun, there was a bunch of different pronunciations depending on region that the Leprechaun stories came from. There is one called, I'm going to pronounce these totally wrong, so don't hate me, Irish people. We love you. But here's my attempts at it. It's a Glugrakon, Lugrakan, Leprechaun, and they were known as a spite or a pygmy, a fairy of diminutive size who always carries a purse containing a shilling. And according to David McNally, the leprechaun is the son of an evil spirit and a degenerate fairy, and is not wholly good or wholly evil. And leprechauns started out part of the folklore and epic poems that were written in the Middle Ages. They started hitting big time in the 19th century, but go way back further than that. The essential characteristics that are in the stories are mainly supernatural figures in each of the Celtic and medieval Irish folklore. I almost said Celtic. I don't know why. So the root word of leprechaun comes from the Irish Celtic or Celtic, sorry, god, cultural hero Lugh. But I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. It's Lugh. Lugh was originally the god of sun and light, and then he became a great warrior of the ancient Ireland. Lugh's statue diminished over time as Christianity took over Europe. He was eventually transformed to Lugh Cromain, meaning stooping Lugh, as he had inhabited the underground world of Sid, where all the other gods were relegated to as people forgot their traditions and embraced new religions. Lugh became a crafty fairy, and from there, Lugh became Leprechaun, the diminutive fairy goblin in the medieval folklores. Moving on. So, we were talking about this earlier about this Lugh god becoming part of the forgotten religion, and you said you had a lot to talk about, and not to get you started on it. I would like to hear more about it now that we're actually recording and explaining this.
Well, one thing we also talked about earlier was how you have a thought and then you forget it. Yeah. Give me a brief summary of this god again one more time, just so I can kickstart my thought I had earlier.
So he was originally a god of sun and light. I'm guessing a pagan god, but became a great ruler of ancient Ireland. His statue literally diminished over time, and as Christianity took over, and he inhabited the underground world of Sid, where all the other gods that were relegated as people forgot about them and embraced new religion. But he became a sort of a crafty fairy, and from there, Lugh became the leprechaun, the diminutive fairy goblin in medieval folklore.
Why do they refer to him as a goblin? That's curious about that.
There's been multiple definitions that I found out for a leprechaun, and they always use a fairy, diminutive or small stature, and goblin as like a way to describe them. I'm wondering if goblin is a term for something that isn't the best looking, because it seems like leprechauns are always like old and wrinkly and not the best looking, as they're always put. They're not like fairies where they're kind of beautiful depending on the description that you're given. That's the closest thing that I could find to why they're called a goblin.
Mm.
I know goblins in other types of narrative forms, they're always tricksters as well, always small in stature, always stealing stuff, taking things away from you. So I wonder if that just kind of got grouped as one going forward
Mm.
with a history of just talking about small creatures,
Yeah. So as far as I'm not 100% sure if this is the thought I had earlier when we were
Yeah, yeah.
mentioning this, but one thing that does come to mind is one thing we talked about as well when it comes to uh, St. Patrick's Day and leprechauns and whatnot is the four-leaf clover and the
Hmm.
shamrock and all that kind of stuff. So when it comes to the four-leaf clover, the three-leaf clover, which is more common, was what St. Patrick used as a way to teach about the Trinity in Christianity.
Hmm.
Was it God, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Ghost?
Yeah.
And so he used that as an example. So then the whole idea of clovers being such a big deal, well, then what if you're going to take that example? What is a four-leaf clover?
Hmm.
What if it's these
Well,
other
we're looking at it always
gods?
as something of luck. You know, it's really rare. I don't think I've really ever seen one in my life, if anything like
Yeah,
that.
no, I've never seen one. I remember looking
Uh,
around as a kid.
exactly. You'd always find the three, and you're like, dang it. Um, but I don't know. All it's usually is the luck of the Irish, and it's a four-leaf clover. You know.
Yeah, so just like an idea of like this, like, okay, the Trinity, what's the
Yeah.
fourth one, the fourth leaf, if you're going to take this Trinity example,
Okay.
this potential, these other gods of Ireland,
Hmm.
it's like it's that fourth one, and then it's like if you have that, that's rare, and like that's a new insight.
Yeah.
So just like obviously this isn't meaning actually anything, but just the idea of
Yeah.
like the three, we're gonna teach this example, then if you take that
Yeah.
the four leaf, what is that four leaf? Is it the devil? Is it
Missing
these
link.
other gods? Is it pagan gods? Is it the
Yeah.
fae? I don't know. I just find that kind of interesting. One thing as well that apparently the druid priests and everything would do is if they found four leaf clovers, they would carry them around with them. They carried around three leaf as well, but the
Hmm.
four leaf in particular, they saw that as some. I couldn't find much as far as why they believed this, but they
Yeah.
believed that a four leaf clover would help you to see evil spirits. It would
Okay.
like be like a connection to the other realm. So
All right.
it became a thing for children to seek out the four leaf clovers so they could see the
Oh.
fairies around them. So because they wanted to play with the fairies, so they would seek these so that way they could see them. And as far as like a reason, the only thing I could kind of see, and then I had to kind of interject my own thoughts into it,
Hmm.
was oftentimes they referred to the four leaf clover being, they referred to it as perfection because
Hmm.
it represented the perfect elements of what you would need for, the world. Was it
Okay.
fire, earth, air, water?
Hmm.
The four elements, so it was a representation of that, and they viewed that as perfection because those are all the ingredients you need for life. And so interjecting my own thoughts, the idea of this perfection will help you detect and see evil spirits is because evil spirits can't reside within perfection.
Hmm.
It makes them uncomfortable. They'll run away from it. They'll be
Yeah.
seen. they'll reveal themselves. It's the same idea with like in Christianity of like Jesus and God being perfect. And so then it's like, it is like a thing of like demons and evil spirits can't stand like the presence of Jesus Christ because he's perfection and he's are dirty and all this stuff. So I think that's kind of the same idea of the four-leaf clover. It's like it's a symbol of perfection of the world and everything, and these unclean, dirty, very imperfect things can't stand to be within its presence.
Okay.
So that's my own like thoughts putting it on there with just a lot of the stuff that I've come to know. But you know, I don't know if they believe that, but either way, they did believe that it would show them evil spirits and everything. So that's just my own little explanation idea.
Yeah. So you're mixing basically Christianity and some pagan thoughts into that.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe the four-leaf clover and the idea of that started out as a pagan root, and maybe Christianity, since St. Patrick brought Christianity to the Irish, who were mostly, I think, pagan at that time.
Mm-hmm. Yep, the pagan druids.
Maybe throughout time, the two ideas of the Christianity and pagan religions kind of mixed together, and we're getting like some of these ideas of, you know, leprechauns and spirits and the fae, all intertwined with Christianity, which were maybe pagan ideas to explain what demons, angels, and God, in a sense, were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like one thing that I think is very kind of disingenuous when it comes to almost any religion, honestly, they always view the other religions as, oh, those are false and lies and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And they just dismiss it. They don't give any credence to any of the teachings. They don't even try to listen to it in a way. And it's kind of the same thing when it comes to like faith versus science and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And like, I've always found those kind of annoying because it's like, well, you can't, like, I understand wanting to believe science and not like faith stuff. Like it makes a little bit more sense. But at the same time, like the big examples is always like, the faith-based people being against science. It's like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, science is science, and there's obviously things that we don't understand about it, but there are hard facts about it as well. And you kind of need science to have life on Earth. So it all does kind of coincide, and it's annoying when people can't just accept that. And they have to, it's like, no, it's only this tunnel vision. It's only this tunnel vision. And it's like, whoa, there's a whole world out there, Take off the blinders. But
yeah, it's pretty interesting because all the religions around the world, and if you add science in as a religion as well, they all have like the same root ideas, that there's a creator, and science kind of helps us, almost like put into words how everything started,
Yeah, but then at the same time, science doesn't prove, that there's no God.
Yeah, it doesn't.
So
if anything, it's kind of at the point where we're getting closer, and it's proven that there is something that happened and science cannot explain it still. It's kind of almost to the point where it's almost giving truth to religion and saying, oh, this miraculously happened and we don't know how.
Yeah, exactly.
Whether it's God's intervention or Thor's intervention or Odin's intervention or Muhammad's intervention or Quetzalcoatl's intervention, all like I was saying, all the cultures have the same root ideas of how life began and have like the same God figure and almost devil figure, and each culture will tell you the other culture is wrong, because I think it comes from like the idea of all these other cultures being kind of like false prophets. I think they would be explained as, and the
Hmm.
people that that wrote these Bibles for these other cultures are not telling you the correct gospel.
Yeah. Yeah,
But if you
exactly.
look into it more, each culture almost has the same root idea, no matter you know how far and deep you get into it.
Hmm. Yeah.
They're slightly different, just to I think to fit each culture's needs.
Yeah. And then to kind of circle back a little bit,
Hmm.
um, with this whole like me versus them mindset of your beliefs, that's another one of like I feel like the science versus faith is like the new of what back then was
Yeah,
pagans versus Christians.
yeah.
And
Or even like Protestants versus Catholics. And
exactly. And
yeah.
it's like, yeah, if you want to argue about certain pagan beliefs that are kind of pushing it on some of the demonic side of things,
Hmm.
there's an argument for that.
Yeah.
But a lot of stuff when it comes to pagans, which I really appreciate, is a lot of their appreciation of the earth,
Hmm.
and how important it is. And it's like, it's almost irking to witness like Christians not appreciate the earth the
Yeah.
way that they do. It's like the earth is just, it's so crazy, like
Yeah.
it really is like an example of perfection in a way, because
Definitely.
how does this all work, all these different life forms, and like it all just kind of works out, this ecosystem and everything.
Yeah.
And of course, if we're going to, as man, kind of mess with it in a way, biggest example would be hunting certain species to extinction,
Yeah.
and over hunting things is one of the biggest effects that I know man has had on the earth throughout the years. And that can happen in nature because of animals don't care, they're just gonna eat at will, but they
Yeah.
just usually don't have the capabilities, especially to our extent. So it's definitely more difficult. But so that's just something when it comes to paganism that I do really have an understanding, and I cherish about that certain aspect of the belief, is this importance of what earth is. So that's kind of made me think about that as far as the four leaf clover thing of perfection,
Hmm.
because the earth, I would say, is damn near perfection. There's all these things on the earth that are kind of ugly, but there's so much stuff that's beautiful, and it all
Yeah.
kind of needs each other to work out. And if that isn't
Exactly.
perfection, then I don't know what is.
Yeah. I think at that point you're just basically just showing that the Earth has almost such a perfect balance, and that balance itself is probably perfection. Having that right
Exactly.
balance of things that are predatory and things that are there as food for everybody else, and then things that need the death of those animals that are being hunted by those predators to grow more life and renew itself. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful
Exactly.
cycle.
And
Yeah.
then when it comes to like the belief of like the Fae and stuff, they're very nature oriented.
Yeah.
And usually stories always have to do with them being very concerned about the environment, and also the different elemental creatures
Hmm.
and spirits that are involved in the Fae, but even more beyond the Fae. It's just in the like druid beliefs and everything.
Yeah.
Pretty like it's just very very earth based, and I just really appreciate that about them.
Yeah. It I just find it like very interesting that there's not many like big cultures out there besides I believe Wiccans as well that put a emphasis on nature in
I
a
think
sense.
Wiccans, like you can still, I think they still count as pagans. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yep. Now we got the
So
Wiccans mad at us because we're calling
yeah,
them.
I think
But
when it comes to Wiccans, that's where it's like I
Yeah.
think like there's pagan, and then when it comes to Wiccan, that's when you do get into more witchcraft and everything.
Yeah.
Which is where you got to be more careful.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But they have like a total emphasis on using nature to
Mhm.
heal things and do what they do what their culture does, you know.
Mhm.
Whereas it seems like all the other cultures, it's put into instead of believing in the earth to, grant you this gifts and stuff, we're looking up to like a figure to give us gifts in a sense.
Mhm. Yeah.
So instead of using a god, they're using Mother Gaia to
Mhm.
grant us all this inner like strength and power, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, and then that's another part of it of like you want to say everything is the same thing. Going
Yeah.
back to that theory, it's like God created Earth, so yes, use God's gift of Earth to
Yeah.
heal and do these other things, you know.
Hmm.
So, it's
Yeah.
just if you're mixing in other stuff that isn't so great, then that's where you gotta be careful. But
Exactly.
yeah. So there's definitely a core to it that is
Hmm.
good.
Yeah.
But okay, so back to leprechauns a little bit.
Yeah.
We got a little distracted with just a lot of the historic faith and whatnot around the
Yeah.
area. So
So the next like small type of leprechaun idea that I found was called a cluracan. It's a male spirit seen in your wider European folklore, and they are said to haunt cellars. So we're going back to poltergeist type idea here.
okay,
They live alone and often dress in fine red clothing. The Cluracan carry purses of silver coins. They're small in size but large in appetite. And their two favorite activities are smoking and drinking. They are said to be rather lazy and prefer to reside in a well stocked wine cellar. Um, they will partake in the finest wines that are available for them. They usually scare the servants away. So now we're getting into the whole uh, spectrum of the almost like the like kind of chunky gnome that's like selfish and mean spirited where I can't really put the idea of in my head of where I was going with. There's like another like creature or
yeah. You should
idea
say something
where
about brownies.
That's probably what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
as brownies are almost quite the opposite, where they will,
Give a little
clean things.
description of what brownies are for people that don't know.
I don't really have like the best description of a brownie. I can look one quick up real fast, but from what I understand, a
They're
brownie is like a spirit that um
they're known as like house spirits, right?
house spirits, yeah,
Yeah,
and
and
they will help like perform chores and other tasks for the humans.
and that
Um,
brownies get into like a lot of just kind of the whole area. It's Irish, Scottish, English. That's in a lot of the culture over there.
yeah,
Right? Yeah,
so
and
it's almost like the leprechaun is the antithesis of, well, at least this chloricon is the antithesis of that brownie because of them being selfish, drunk, and lazy, whereas the brownie is the quite the opposite of hardworking. It almost kind of reminds me of like a for to put this in terms for people that might understand it nowadays, almost of like a house elf Dobby situation where,
yeah.
yeah, that's where I get when I think of a brownie.
Yeah. What did cuz I'm not a Harry Potter fan. What did Dobby, what did he actually do? Did he do like chores around the house and stuff?
He was kind of like a house slave. He did chores, he did things like that, and the whole idea, I think it was Draco's dad. I think I can't remember what his name is right now. My wife would kill me because she's a big Harry Potter fan,
Yeah,
but
everyone should
me
know.
having a son named Draco too. So, uh, but the whole idea is that his master treated him bad, and if the master gave him like an article of clothing, if I remember right, he was free and his servitude was done.
Hmm.
So
That yeah, there's so many just like funny little rules around
yeah,
everything with that kind of stuff.
yeah. That
Yeah.
I feel like these, for the most part, these are like old tales to kind of like tell us before we had the ability to understand what morality and our consequences for our actions were.
Mm.
There was these tales to kind of like stop us from like doing bad things, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Like the whole idea of the Wendigo, you know, not to be greedy and
Mm-hmm.
to be more community driven, not to be keep everything for yourselves, because that greed and that insatiable hunger will never be, you know, satiated.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now it
The
almost seems like these leprechauns are uh, maybe older people or people that were workers that could be lazy or maybe hardworking, depending on the idea, you know,
mm-hmm.
of where it came from.
Yeah. The universal language of don't do that because of this consequence.
Yeah,
Don't eat the homies because you'll be possessed by a Wendigo
yeah,
spirit. I do think, like, yeah, when it comes to brownies, it's like it's just their way to explain a lot of stuff that happens around the house.
yeah,
If you have a house and everything, because like there's so many things when it comes to like just weird little like, oh, they'll drink your liquor, they'll steal your food off the counter if you leave it out overnight.
yeah,
Like this kind of stuff where it's like it's just little things to tell people like common sense like nowadays of
yeah,
like don't do that because you know don't leave food out because the like mice and rodents will
yeah,
infest it. It was but then it was called, I don't remember what the exact thing was called, but there's like, especially when it comes to like old English and Irish folklore, there's just like a little spirit, a little house spirit, a brownie is what they call
yeah,
them, for like every little thing when it comes to like
yeah,
leaving like your floors dirty, or you know you moved around your furniture too much. Like everything has its own
yeah.
little brownie involved with it.
It makes me think that, you know, this Leprechaun character was maybe a scapegoat for the town drunk sneaking into someone's cellar and drinking all the alcohol, you know, and be like, "Oh, that damn Leprechaun got you again."
Yeah, exactly. It's like they used them as like little common sense like
Yeah,
lessons, but then also
yeah,
they used them as an excuse. You're like, oh
yeah,
yeah, it was the local spirit.
yeah.
Like, yeah.
They got you. Yeah.
That's so
Um,
funny.
the next type that I found that was being grouped in with the leprechauns was called a far darig. He is an ugly fairy with wrinkled old face, very fond of practical jokes, but they can get lethal and they are considered a evil leprechaun. The one good trait of a far darig is that he can, if he so wishes, release people that are trapped in the fairyland.
Mm.
So
And
I know we talked about that. Maybe that was the source of the idea of that you had earlier that you couldn't remember, is that, you know, we talked about the leprechaun was an idea that could unleash a person from that, you know, maybe purgatory in a sense.
yeah. Oh, I remember my thought earlier. Okay, you
Got
said
it.
the word purgatory.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, there was something you were talking about earlier that had to do with like a leprechaun or something,
Yeah.
where people disappear or something like that. Like they go, or maybe it's the spirits themselves that they go away,
Yeah.
and like they don't know what happens to them or something.
Yeah. It's when you don't keep sight of the leprechaun, they can disappear and they can come back.
Yeah. There was that, but there was something when it comes to, so it was something to do with the realms or something. Maybe it was the Fae,
Yeah.
where something can happen, like whether it's the leprechauns doing it to people or something happening to those spirits. of where they go away and they don't know what happened to them, where they just go into nothingness or something.
Yeah. You
But
know,
oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, the disappearing and coming back. We just talked about this on our last podcast about an alien that could disappear and come back whenever he wanted to.
Little green
And
men.
goblins are considered part of that little green men
Mm-hmm.
idea.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we've already talked about how possibly a poltergeist as well as a spirit that comes in if you maybe invite it a bit, if you put that idea out there, it just makes you think of how weird it is. All these things are just always interconnected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, yeah. There's always similarities when it
Yeah.
comes down to it, especially the color green. Like
Yeah.
green
Yeah.
men, like yeah.
Yep.
Green is just like so associated with aliens, like
Yeah.
so no, yeah, that's definitely interesting.
Because it's
Uh
like it's not a color that we typically see with things that we consider humanistic, or have traits of humans,
mm-hmm.
or things that are like friendly to us, our
Yeah.
animals that we've domesticated, pretty much besides the lizards, are not green. But
Yeah.
we think of lizards as, in another previous episode, we talked about the lizard men.
Mm-hmm.
So
But
we already think
then
that,
then what is green is like most of the earth.
yeah,
And then like the Fae, their whole thing is that they live in the forest. They're very foresty type creatures in a different dimension. So there's a lot of green associated with these interdimensional beings.
yeah,
Aliens, interdimensional beings, there's green associated with them,
which,
So
like I said, goes back on they're not very uh, humanistic. They're not very have that human traits
mm-hmm.
because they don't look like humans or have a human shape for the most part.
Yeah.
There's always something that's a little different on how they look compared to like everything that we consider normal.
Yeah.
Um, but correct with like you would think that humans would consider these possibly good entities because we look at the color green as almost like a healing color.
Yeah.
But then also, I guess now to interject my thoughts, like you said, like you had earlier, green is maybe poison, envious. So
Greed.
greed,
Wendigo.
indigo, right? So it almost has like that dueling thought of do we pick and choose what we think is good and bad and then associate them with the color, or do we associate with the color because of what we truly see?
Well,
You know?
one thing that's interesting about color, this is something we can get into of a whole different episode subject,
Yeah.
is color is a big deal when it comes to gin. They're distinct with the different colors for them. I don't remember all the different ones, but I do know that like blue is like knowledge. So it's
Okay.
like jinn that are
Yeah.
associated with intelligence and stuff like that. And then when it comes to what we're talking about, Wiccan, witchcraft, there's color stuff involved with that. The
Yeah.
types of magic, black magic, white magic, blue magic, like they literally distinct the different types.
Hmm.
But then also the thing that's interesting about this is you'll find if you actually dig deep into like some of this color stuff when they talk about the magic and everything, they will very well like talk about these colors are for this and that. But
Hmm.
then they'll say it, but they don't really put much thought into it. Is then they'll admit that all magic is colorless and it's all the same thing.
Yeah.
So it's like they'll warn you about don't play with this color of magic because it's dangerous. This color magic's fun. And then in the same article, all magic is colorless and it's all the same thing. Like, so.
So it just works when it would with however they want to brand it, you know. And we usually associate black with, you know, demonic things and white with holy things, and so I could see them using like that whole idea of branding certain things to make people stay away from certain spells that might hold more power and maybe a little bit more volatile compared to, you know, something that might be white magic, you know, that safe.
Because ultimately,
And
intention does matter,
yeah,
no matter what the cause and like the weapon, the whatever it is. Even if it's something that is inherently not nasty and you shouldn't mess with it, intention does matter. So yeah. Now you were saying. So as far as this mystical thought that we had off the air, I need you, because I remember what my thought is, but I don't remember exactly what I was associating it with when it comes to the Irish stuff. But I think it had to do with potentially this god that you talked about.
Luke.
So there was him, but then there was also other gods. So Luke, what's his deal again? What's his?
He's the god of. Let me go back up to my notes real fast. He is the god of sun and light, and so he was a great warrior ruler of Ireland, and he had a statue that was made of him that diminished over time, as the power of Christianity started taking over. And from there on, from as he was losing power, basically his statue was crumbling, he got sent to the underground world of Sid, I believe it's called, where all these other gods that were forgotten and lost their power were relegated to, and he escaped and became a leprechaun in a sense.
Okay. So this is a whole lot of Christianity stuff mixed in there. For one, he was associated with this statue of him, and that statue fell apart, and so then he like lost his power or whatever, like he went away. Like, so that's
because Christianity started taking over for, I guess, probably the pagan ideas of what he stood for.
So that's, for one, that's got Jinn written all over it, of the attachment. He's attached to this statue and everything. It also just has a going back to the attention, the entertainment, the entertaining the idea, and it keeps it alive. It goes into that. But then the fact of he went to this underground thing, blah, 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 where all these other gods are that are forgotten.
Relegated,
Hell. There's different depictions of hell. Your classic is like fiery, brimstone, all that stuff. Typically thought it's underground. So there's a connection there. But one thing that also stood out to me was it talks about forgotten, that these other gods that were forgotten. There's another depiction of hell that people don't really talk about too much, but it is in there in the Bible and everything. That hell is not about punishment. It's not about eternal damnation and you're gonna suffer for the rest of your, I guess, eternity in hell. Which I think, honestly, in my opinion, makes a little bit more sense, is outer darkness, which the description of what outer darkness is that you have proven that you cannot reside with everybody else because of whatever wickedness that is in you that cannot be undone. So you are cast out away from everybody for all of eternity. You are in absolutely nothingness. You are in outer darkness. There is nobody exists there. Everybody is forgotten. Yeah. It is just nothingness, and you'll live there for the rest of your days, and who knows what really happens to a person that is cast outer darkness, because it's just nothingness. They're cast into nothingness. So that's what popped in my head when we were talking about it, he went down to this spot with these other gods that were forgotten because they were cast into nothingness where no one remembered them. And a big thing of coming back to Christianity again, there's a scripture that talks about like repenting of your sins and God will remember them no more. So like literally, like if you do the proper repentance, you get over whatever that sin was. God forgets it, like it never happened. It's not even like, it's not something that God's gonna hold over your head, be like, remember when you did that? I know you repented, but which your classic toxic relationship stuff right there. So then it's forgotten, cast into outer darkness, maybe like the actual entity of the energy that you created that became like this negative energy gets cast into outer darkness. This God that you created to worship for whatever reason in times of desperation, if you created this deity so that you could have whatever means of some sort of emotional resolution or something, became an actual like a poltergeist became an actual entity, and that entity was taken care of in some sort of way, and then was cast out, and everybody forgot about it. So it was just
kind of reminds me of what you're talking about. It kind of reminds me of the movie Coco, where the whole idea of they were all in the afterlife. The whole idea was they were so afraid that people were going to forget them, and then when they forget about them, they dissipate, and they're gone forever.
Yeah.
So it's crazy how every time we talk about these cryptids, mythical subjects, there's always things that just connect with each other. And even if you're not the biggest, scholar in knowing all of these different things, there's at least something that you can grab onto and be like, oh, I've heard of that before. Oh, that reminds me of this, or that reminds me of that. And and that's like the one thing that I know myself from being a part of the panel that we have here with me, you, and Josiah. Sometimes I sit down and just sit there and just listen to you guys talk, and I forget that I'm part of this because it's so much information, and it's so like so much, and I'm like, oh, thinking in my head, I'm like, I can connect it with this, I can connect it with that, even though I don't have the most knowledge of what we're talking about most of the time, because a lot of it's new to me. But
we're all learning here. This is like
exactly, and that's one of the coolest reasons to do this podcast, is because there's that knowledge that just I love and I just crave, and it's always learning new things that I would never put the effort in outside of this podcast to probably learn, because there's other things that I have on mind that I want to do and learn about. But that's why I love this podcast, because it just brings just all these ideas and things, and just so much, and it's just so cool just to hear like you and Josiah talk about from my point of view. And I hope that's something that our listeners will appreciate the further that we go on, is like seeing that there's just so much to know that we're probably not even going to get into, like most of the topics about leprechauns that a lot of people know about and we're going to forget. But there's just so much to talk about that we get sidetracked and talk about all these like long stories that have nothing to do about leprechauns, but they connect in some way or another. They connect to each other, and it's just cool.
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, I agree. Like, it's like a classroom. Like, welcome to class. We're learning today,
Yeah.
Yeah. So to try to make us not get off subject so much,
Yeah.
so but then kind of stay on what we were just on. This what was his name again? This god that he went to,
Luke, I
Lug.
believe.
So he went to this underworld, but then he got out. Did it specify anything as far as like how he got out, like
No,
that kind of stuff?
no, it just says that he became a, a fairy craftsman and he became the leprechaun, the diminutive fairy goblin in medieval folklore.
Okay.
So maybe the way he got out is there was some little like idea, minute idea that was being passed on slowly and slowly and slowly until medieval times. It got started getting passed around more as maybe like, there's crusades going on. People were getting conquered. Maybe people were fleeing, to other lands, and they started passing that story on, and it just started growing from there on, and he became this new, almost like leprechaun idea.
Okay. So the leprechaun is a god.
Or used to be a god.
Or used to be, yeah. And
Yeah.
then was stripped of his power and then became mischievous and
Yeah.
runs around playing tricks on people. Yeah, that's funny. One thing that is, I don't know if I've already like talked about this or said this. Very last little like Christian comparison,
Yeah.
and then we should try to stick with leprechauns a little bit more.
Okay.
The big one in the Bible that like I think everybody's heard at some point is God saying, I'm paraphrasing, the whole line about thou shalt not like worship no other gods before me.
Mm-hmm.
Usually everybody is always like, he's, Christianity, he's the one true God. Yeah. And they take it as he's the only God.
Mm-hmm.
But there is words where it literally says no other gods. He's using that word, gods. So I don't know. I think when we talk about these stories and this folklore where they talk about these gods and deities, that you got to give it a little bit more respect than you initially think, because I think there's just a little bit more to these stories,
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot that has probably been, lost in translation and lost over time because, the Bible has been translated through different languages and probably only select verses and select ideas have been translated in. Possibly we've lost a lot of it due to people only passing on the things that they like or the important things to them at the time, So it makes you think of what else have we lost? Have we lost maybe in the Bible were other books that have talked about other gods that were under God in a sense, or maybe brother gods, or, maybe our Bible at one point was closer to the Greek gods in a sense where Zeus was the god of gods. And then underneath that, there's all the lower gods that, each had like their own little part. Makes you think that maybe we lost that. Maybe at one point, whoever was translating the Bible didn't think that was, useful information to pass on.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So
it would make sense that there'd be something like that with that paraphrase of, don't put, any other god before me, in a sense.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
don't put your leper god con.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I know with leprechauns, it just seems like there's so many different variations with them.
Oh yeah. I have one more variation to talk about too.
Perfect. Here. Let's get into it.
You want to get to it?
Yeah.
So this one is a Celtic mythology idea. So it says there were these fairies or elves known as Lecorip or Lecorpan.
Don't hate
they
us
appeared
Irish
in
people.
Irish literature in the Ectra Fergusa Mike Leti, the adventure of Fergus, son of Leti, which dates back to 8th century CE. It says a number of mischievous,
Mischievous.
mischievous. Thank you. I cannot talk today.
After you're
Spirits.
pronouncing all these words, it's like
Yeah,
then it's like all you try to pronounce all the words like that, and it's like
yeah,
I can't speak.
yeah. It's because I'm trying to like put English and Spanish and Irish all together because those are like the languages I know how to speak. Well, I don't know how to speak Irish, but Spanish for the most part.
Mm,
Um, but it's talks about these mischievous spirits capture the hero Fergus while he is asleep. They take away his sword and attempt to carry him over the water. Fergus wakes up when one of his toes touches the water, and he manages to grab the three spirits or sprites. Sorry, the sprites win their freedom by promising to teach Fergus their swimming skills. So there adds a little bit of the more of the wow,
mischievous.
mischievous ideas of leprechauns, and it goes back to like the root word of sprite, which could be a spirit or a fae or a
Mm,
fairy. Um,
mm,
it goes back to the ideas that they have this power to give certain imbuing their subjects with whatever they want. Maybe this idea of gold, but for Fergus at this time it was swimming skills.
mm,
So is maybe the gold, like I said earlier, is maybe the gold like some kind of reward, but with our society nowadays talking about a reward, we always look at it as money or
mm.
some kind of currency that we're able to trade for the things that we want. Um,
Yeah.
I'm s- I'm seeing like through all these like little tales that maybe uh the gold, the silver is a lesson to be learned or a lesson that needed that these leprechauns gave out.
Mm.
Um, I don't know if that's something that that you're grabbing from this text as well, but I almost feel like going back to the idea of that these are like old style folklores um to teach us lessons about life, that if we do good or if we're bad, then we're gonna get something bad done to us. But if we're doing good, we get a reward of somehow.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe if we find the fairies, if we can capture them, they will give us this pot of gold, or in Fergus's stance, the swimming skills.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder if it's like, that there's a couple of different meanings all going on at the same time when it comes to like telling these stories and
Hmm.
uh, whatnot, because it's like it's a little life lesson of like how did it turn out for the person, what did they
Yeah,
wish for, um and just kind of like almost like encouraging, like because you're encouraging your audience to think
yeah,
like logically, and like if you were in this circumstance, what would you wish for.
yeah,
It, if anything, like it encourages imagination, it encourages creativity, it encourages thinking about things and try
yeah.
and like thinking things thoroughly, being a critical thinker.
Hmm.
Because yeah, if you were to catch a leprechaun, you want and you like can't have your one wish or whatever, uh
Hmm.
what would you wish for?
Yeah,
That's a good question. You can have
yeah,
whatever, and like what's the wish, man?
yeah.
Like you better have a good wish, you better think critically about this, you
I've
know.
watched too many Leprechaun movies. The first thing that thinks to my mind is like, how can I wish without getting any repercussions?
Exactly, because that's another side of it,
Yeah,
is be careful what you wish for.
exactly.
And maybe that's another lesson within it, is you can't just wish for things.
Yeah,
You can't just make these deals with people and have an outside source grant you these wishes. If you really want something, you're gonna have to do it yourself, because
Yeah.
these outside wish granters are not going to give you what exactly you want, or there's a trade-off, and are you willing to pay that trade-off, you know?
Yeah.
So
And it
you know,
goes back to greed.
yep, yep. I yeah, I did listen. Yeah, I did hear about that one when
Yeah.
it comes to they're trying to drag him into the water, because that's one
Yeah.
thing as well. It's like, so they were trying to like drown him, like
Yeah, that's I didn't get it was such a small excerpt, but I was like, wait, they're leaving out so much information. I don't know what they're trying to say. If like you said, if they're trying to drown him, or if they're trying to steal his sword for maybe their master, if they have a master, or what's going on there.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember I heard this other story where, you know, whatever type of leprechaun was caught, and then was like, he had a bunch of like stuff with him, and so then he was like, I'll grant you a wish. I'll give you like these certain things. Like, he had a bunch of stuff with him. And he gave the human like these choices of like,
Yeah.
what do you want to grant me my freedom in return to let me go? And I guess this is a good example of greed. Is like the first thing that he offered him was really good, but then the human was like, well, what's that? And then, you know, it was like something like, oh, what's that? And it was something, you know.
Yeah.
And then he had a harp, and then the human was like, is that a harp? He's like, yeah, it's a beautiful harp. I'll play you a song, and like all this stuff. So the human was like, okay, yeah, let's do that one. And it was a magical harp that put people to sleep. So it put the human to sleep, and the leprechaun was able to get away and left as he ran off.
Yeah.
So that's a great example of greed, of like,
Yeah.
you have an opportunity in front of you, but yeah, you'd be like, what about that one? Like, and then just keep digging deeper where you know that you shouldn't. So, yeah.
And that was like one of the like common ideas that kept coming back, is that leprechauns are always trying to distract their captor once they're captured, but they always play into humans' gullibility and their greed by always tricking them to look away, or tricking them into something that they don't necessarily want, but it looks pretty, it looks cool at the time, or it's something that sounds cooler than what I really, really, really need at this time, you know?
Yeah, exactly. So, and I mean, yeah, just the very idea of the classic fairy tale of the leprechaun, of find his pot of gold, and then he can grant you 3 wishes, blah blah blah, all that stuff. It's a good tale as far as like, don't be greedy. Like, you know, so it usually always backfires on the person that is seeking this pot of gold and everything. And that's the thing that we don't talk about, is the classic leprechaun story of seeking his pot of gold to steal. You're stealing his pot of gold. It is not yours. So morally it's wrong. Even if like maybe the leprechaun, it was, maybe they got it morally wrong as well. It doesn't make it, 2 wrongs don't make it right, you know?
Yeah.
So that's something I think is never acknowledged, is the classic leprechaun story involves immorality. So
And it goes back to like, you know, back to the Bible again. You know, the whole coveting other people's property type of deal, you know? And it just makes you think of like the whole story, maybe the whole idea of what that story is telling you is, don't seek, you know, material wealth, or things that you think you want, you know. Don't like distract yourself from like living your life if you're trying to live a full life and have that like nice car, or that, you know, big house that, you know, your friends want, or, you know, go on those trips so you can post pictures on your Facebook or your Instagram to show off. You know, why worry about that when, you know, there's more to life than that pot of gold?
Worry about that rainbow more than the gold itself.
Go ahead.
It doesn't
really mention, you know, anything else besides the pot of gold. It's always pot of gold is the main idea, but you know, you have this big rainbow that you're finally at the end of, which I don't know if anybody else that's listening to this or even you, Brandon, I've never got to the end of a rainbow. Would
No,
that be more of a majestic sight, or more of an interesting idea?
that's a good point. Is yeah, you never do actually see the end of the rainbow, you know? It's like it always appears like that.
Yeah,
You're never going to get to the end of it.
yeah.
So,
So is the idea of like your search for greed never ending, going back to the Wendigo?
Irish Wendigos, let's go.
Irish Wendigo, the
Let's
leprechaun.
let's Wendigo.
Yeah,
Um,
but
yeah.
yeah, it's just interesting to just think of like the idea of, you know, we're too obsessed with the end reward instead of like falling in love with this like journey to get there. So
Mm,
is that maybe a different idea to that the pot of gold story is teaching us, that maybe the journey is more important than the actual reward?
mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's like you'll never you'll never get, no matter what your reward is,
Yeah,
it's never exactly what you had in mind.
yeah,
You know, things happen along the way that it's like if it's pretty close to exactly what you had in mind, it's the circumstance is different by the time you get there.
yeah,
So yeah, I mean, yeah, it really comes down to the journey
yeah,
more than anything, because
yeah,
you can't put all your eggs in one basket. You can't put all your coins in one pot of gold
yeah,
on banking on this one thing, because you will be disappointed. You won't
definitely.
get there in time. It'll be forever. It's forever over there. Grass is always greener on the other side, and then you get to the
Yeah,
other side, and then guess what? Oh, even over there, it's even greener.
yeah,
Even over there, it's even greener. You know, so it's a perception thing. There's layers and layers of lessons to be learned when it comes to these old folklore stories. Is what it comes down to.
definitely. And it's all in the eye of the beholder of how you want to perceive any of these stories, because a story like this of just trying to steal the pot of gold, you know, we've already distinguished that there's multiple different ideas that could be that pot of gold or the story of stealing it. It's
Hmm.
not just one idea. It's on what you believe that idea or that story could teach you. There's a
Yep.
lot of people that are nearsighted and look at stories or ideas or folklore as entertainment, you know
Hmm.
and we're looking at these folklores, these stories, these films, and we like to kind of break them down and see them as a way of maybe teaching us something, or some knowledge, or trying to connect the dots. There's different ideas on where we can go with each of these stories.
Hmm. Yeah, for real. Um, and speaking of films, have you ever seen the Leprechaun movie, the horror movie?
I started watching like the first like little bit with Jennifer Aniston, and I
Hmm.
couldn't finish it. I remember more of Leprechaun 3, where he's
Mm.
in Vegas more, and I just remember of them being like more of what I would think that a Jinn movie would be about, more than
Mm.
a Leprechaun.
Yeah.
But I've never seen a full on Leprechaun movie. It's like one of the one horror franchises I've never like put effort into.
That's fair. Yeah, because like, yeah, the idea of it is totally up my alley. But then like, I've seen so many clips and like so many things of people making fun of it or talking
Yeah.
about it and everything, that it's like I almost feel like I've seen them anyway. Because like, isn't number three where like the amulet and stuff is introduced or whatever? Or at
I
least
think
I think maybe
so.
it was introduced in number two, but it's like part of
Yeah.
the key to him coming back in number three.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So,
Not to mention that the next one he goes into space.
Yeah, and then in
And
the
and then he
hood.
goes, one of my coworkers, we were just talking about that. He's like, one of my favorite like fun movies that I don't care about, but I love is Leprechaun Back to the Hood. He's like, it's so stupid, but it's so funny, but it's awesome. And
That's
I'm like,
great.
you said so much that I kind of want to watch it now.
One thing that I heard, I don't know if it's the first one, I think it's the first one, not the second one, of like the unique thing about back to or just Leprechaun into Hood
Yeah.
is it's one of the only it is the only Leprechaun movie, but one of the only when it comes to the franchises of these classic like 90s 80s horror movie characters
Yeah.
that he actually wins in the end versus
Yeah.
like just dying to then come back somehow, you know. So it's like
Yeah.
he actually wins like the full thing. So it's just kind of
It's
interesting.
it's
But
interesting.
isn't one of the big rappers is in that one?
It's T.
It's Ice T, right? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's Ice T. That's right. It's so
Yeah.
funny. Classic Ice T.
It is a classic.
Um,
But to finish the last little bit of Leprechauns and go into our
mhm.
next subject, um, so there is no record of any female leprechauns.
Oh, I thought I
Ooh.
heard there being like that they're just rare, like super rare.
According to Carolyn White's A History of Irish Fairies,
Okay.
there's no record.
Oh, like an actual like record. So I'm sure people probably
Yeah,
added to it afterwards.
yeah.
But okay,
And
interesting.
leprechauns were known to wear red instead of the traditional green that we're known about. And um, they wore a bunch of buckles everywhere. I think there was 7 buckles that was on each of their uh, jackets,
Mm.
and then they wore the tri-cornered hats that were almost like the typical like old military hats
Yeah,
that
yeah,
that we were like for like revolutionary times.
yeah.
Um, but to finish it off and connect to our next idea that we're going to be talking about is that leprechauns have their own holiday, which is May 13th, but they also are celebrated on St. Patrick's Day.
Eh.
And so St. Patrick's Day is the day in which the Irish celebrate St. Patrick,
Mm,
who is the patron saint of Ireland,
yeah.
I believe. And St. Patrick's Day was the one day that the Christian see or which falls during Christian Lent, and it's the one day that church would waive the prohibition against the consumption of meat and alcohol.
Mm,
And so they would feast and drink and have fun during the day, and then the next day they'd have to get back to their boring lives on Lent.
mm.
And so Saint Patrick was was born in Roman Britain, and he was kidnapped and brought to Ireland as a slave at 16. He escaped but returned back to Ireland and was credited with bringing Christianity to its people.
Mm.
In the centuries following his death, the mythology surrounding his life was even more ingrained on the Irish culture, and it is perhaps what you talked about earlier that he was the one that explained the Holy Trinity to the native culture around using the 4-leaf or the 3-leaf clover, the shamrock.
Mm.
It's that legend also says that St. Patrick was born Maewyn Succat, and that he changed his name to Patricius or Patrick, which is named for father figure after he became a priest,
Wow.
and that of his the luck that he had in his life is the root for all of the merchandise and uh, idea for St. Patrick's Day,
Okay.
or for the idea of luck of the Irish. The clover is the themed idea of St. Patrick's Day, and that's why they use the shamrock.
Okay.
And I believe each saint has like something that they're associated with, like I believe some kind of object, and of course he is associated with a three-leaf clover.
Hmm.
Are you of Irish descent?
As far as I know, I have more Scottish in me than Irish, but
Yeah.
I think like a little bit. The big thing is like that I found out somewhat recently is my grandmother. Well, I guess not. When I say grandmother, I guess my grandfather, his side
Mhm.
of everything, goes all the way back to William Wallace stuff.
That's cool.
And in particularly, the family name is one of the clans. It's been like derivative and changed over time a little bit, but it was one of the clans of, but they might have pronounced it differently, but it's like Moffat,
Hmm.
whereas it became like Moffat, but it was like
Yeah.
It was more like spelled like fat, like
Yeah.
Moffat. One of the clans that was associated with William Wallace, and were eventually like exiled because after all the William Wallace stuff was over and everything, they didn't like bend the knee per se.
Hmm.
So I know I got roots in that, but as far as I don't know, I mean like Irish and Scottish is very similar and everything, but yeah, I don't know if too much goes into actual Irish. But
Yeah.
do you have any Irish in you at all?
No, none. But
We got that
where I was
hat.
going with that is, right, I am now with a hat.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
before I get in trouble for cultural appropriation, I was going to say something else that would get me in trouble is that on St. Patty's Day, we're all Irish.
Hey.
But
Perfect.
um, it I feel like Americans have again hijacked the idea of St. Patrick's Day to um, feed on like an idea to be gluttonous and drink a lot. And the funny thing is, uh, if I could find it right here, is our idea of St. Patty's Day, where we drink and everything like that, was an actual thing in New York, I believe, where they had um a parade, and the newspapers called all the Irish community. That's when they were celebrating their heritage. They called them drunk, violent monkeys.
Oh,
So,
dang.
and the whole idea between the St. Patrick's Day parade, and at least in America, was to celebrate the heritage and show strength in numbers because when they came over, I believe it was like in the 1800s where the Irish famine that was happening, the potato famine.
Yeah.
It was hard for them to get jobs and to get culturally accepted here because they had different beliefs and their accents. Um, you know, how people are in America that, if you're a little different, you're not treated the best.
Mm-hmm.
And so, um, but to finish off the idea with St. Patrick's Day is St. Patrick's Day has always been a spiritual and religious holiday in Ireland. In fact, up to the 1970s, Irish laws mandated that pubs be closed on March 17th. And it wasn't until 1995 that the Irish government began a national campaign to use St. Patrick's Day to drive up not terrorism, tourism, and showcase the cultural of Ireland. Wow, the culture of Ireland and the Irish culture to the rest of the world.
Hmm.
And I also read another fact that Budweiser was like one of the first uh, big companies that helped with that idea of pushing out the Irish culture to the rest of the world.
Okay. Yeah, so then that actually adds a little bit even more to like the association of like alcohol and everything is
Yeah.
because the introduction to it was through alcohol for a
Yeah.
lot of people.
Hmm.
No, yeah, one thing you mentioned the potato famine and everything, and there's a movie that's actually about that. Um, it's called Black 47. It's pretty
Hmm.
much like The Patriot, but like the Irish Patriot. Like
Interesting.
it's good. It's a good movie. So I definitely recommend that as far as if
I'll
you're
check it out.
intrigued into a little bit of Irish history and everything.
But before we move on, I forgot about one of the most important things, the color green.
Mm.
The color green wasn't associated with St. Patrick until 1798. Until then, St. Patrick was always associated with blue, and it was blue that was on the ancient Irish flags and the royal court. But since the British wore red and the Irish started to choose to wear green because of the song, the wearing of the green during their rebellion against the British.
Hell
And
yeah.
it cemented the relevance of the color in the history of Ireland. Wow, I can't talk today. All of that trying to pronounce Irish language has broken up my words.
One thing that the Irish got right is their hate for the Brits.
Yeah. It's funny to this day it still stands because I remember a few years ago I was in uh Canada for my friend playing a concert, and shout out to Wolftron if he's listening. But I was having a beer at the venue, and I was outside with a couple of buddies, and there was this Irish guy that was out there, and so we just started talking to him and having a good time, and he was a pretty cool guy and talked really really fast. And one of my buddies goes, "Oh, you ever make it over to England?" And the first thing he said was, "Fuck England." Those are cocky. I can't remember the exact word he said, but he says they're cocky, and then he said a word that I cannot remember to this day. I always try to remember it, and it's just the funniest thing ever.
It's probably
And
some
it
type of
shows their hate.
variation of the C word, I imagine.
I think it was something close to that. But it just shows that that hatred still stands to this day.
Yeah, that's wild. Well, yeah, especially because it's like when it comes to America, it's like we can be like, haha, flip them off. You know,
Yeah,
we're doing our own thing. But then
yeah,
when it comes to Scottish and Irish, it's like they tried, but
yeah.
didn't work out so well. So yeah,
They're
they
too close in the vicinity to England to run
exactly.
away.
It's still a
Yeah,
sore matter.
yeah.
So
But now they're united to the United Kingdom.
yeah, yeah.
Um, do you have any last thoughts or ideas to add to St. Patty's Day?
um, it is a very deep rabbit hole, that's for sure. Or should we say fey hole?
Yeah.
It is like there's a lot to all this stuff, and like we're definitely gonna have to have a dedicated episode to the Fae, but like
Hmm.
just when it comes to just it's such a rich history and everything,
Yeah.
especially because like it is like our modern like connection to like a very far back time. I mean, like, because we have in different like parts of Europe and everything, like there's like Rome and like Greece and like
Yeah.
some of those like super far back ones, but a lot of it is because of structures and whatnot. There's still a lot of information that was lost to time.
Yeah.
And when it comes to Irish folklore and a lot of the surrounding islands and everything around there, not too much. Like, obviously, stuff has been lost to time, but a lot of it has been preserved, and that's
Hmm.
like pretty awesome, honestly, like because there's just so much information out there of what these people believed and different things and everything. I mean, obviously there's just so much more that was lost, but there's quite a lot that was preserved and is, kind of in the grand scheme of the universe and everything is recent history, so that's pretty cool.
It seemed like Ireland kept, pretty much to their small island that they have. They never really set out to conquer anybody. They pretty much got conquered. Whereas I believe like the Greeks and the Romans and other cultures, they try to conquer so much and people hated them.
Hmm.
And, maybe that's a reason why a lot of their stuff has been forgotten over time.
That's
Whereas,
a good point, because then also it's like the cultures that were conquered, their history was destroyed.
yeah,
Whereas for Gaelic and Druid and all this old, like
Celtic, yeah.
Irish and Celtic, all this stuff, it wasn't destroyed.
Oh,
And that's pretty awesome, honestly.
yeah,
Like, and they're your classic, like, it's like an underdog story, You can
yeah.
root for them and feel good about it. And then it's just a fun culture, There's even because even when it comes to like all these like different folklore and legends and spiritual things in the cultures, we mentioned like the Middle East, a jinn, stuff like that.
Hmm.
There's a lot of stuff where when it comes to like the evil and the kind of dark side of things, it is just so like like
Yeah,
not fun. Whereas it's interesting with like Irish and whatnot is there's so much like tricksters and joking and
yeah,
like there's so much when it comes to that
yeah.
that
And everything is not wholly evil or, bad or wholly
hmm.
evil or good. There's always there's something in between. They can do good things and bad things.
And then it probably just speaks to the people. The people
Yeah,
are positive. They
yeah.
have these certain things that have happened to them, they have every reason to be a negative people, and like
Yeah,
they still have negative feelings about like the British. But then
yeah.
there's like the famine back then and whatnot, and then we're not even going to get into the Irish slave trade and like how
Hmm.
Irish people are one of the like number ones when it comes to slavery, like in recent history. So that's something that a lot of people don't know about, and we're not going to get into it. But there's a real history behind Irish people and what they've been through. They've been through quite a lot, and yet they still maintain this positive outlook, and that's quite commendable. So their culture as a whole is pretty awesome, just how positive it is.
Yeah. And it it tells you a lot about like the idea of all these like spirits, like you were saying, were being fun, and that they're fun, they're not wholly bad or wholly evil or good. And then we have like our Americanized idea of what the Irish are, you know, them being drunk, them always fighting, them always causing a ruckus. So it makes me think back to, did that whole idea come from maybe possibly that parade where the newspaper put that idea out there, you know?
Yeah.
And
Well, yeah.
whereas,
That's like a thing is like everywhere they go, they just go through so much, but yet
yeah,
still keep their heads up and like because yeah, all the immigration stuff
yeah,
of Irish people that came to America. And there's that newspaper that pretty much sums it up,
yeah.
of like generally speaking, there was a distaste and
Hmm.
disrespect towards them. And maybe it's because they were rowdy and maybe a little disrespectful themselves, so no one felt the need. But it's interesting.
Yeah. But it's an interesting idea how we've taken that whole idea and America has made so much money off of it with, St. Patty's Day, and
Mm-hmm.
look at even Notre Dame, the college, their mascot is the Fighting Irish, you know,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and we've associated the whole idea of St. Patty's Day with being drunk
Mm-hmm.
instead of, celebrating their past. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
it just makes you think. Go ahead.
One thing that's interesting about the whole St. Patty's Day thing is it's associated with like Lent and everything. And when it
Yeah.
comes to Lent, that is an idea of it's very similar to like Ramadan and stuff when it comes to like the Muslim culture and
Mhm.
everything, where Ramadan's a little bit more, but when
Yeah.
it comes to Lent, generally speaking, it is you give up a certain thing for what is it? Is it a full month or I don't remember exactly. I
I
think
don't
it's a full
remember.
month.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just a week for some people, but the
I
idea
think
is,
it might be a full month.
I think so. Yeah, I know
Yeah.
Ramadan's a full month, so
Yeah.
you give up like a vice. You give up something that you know is technically a negative thing. Some people
Yeah.
they'll give up meat for the month. They'll give up alcohol for the month. They'll give several
Smoking.
things. Smoking, literally, video games. Tons of stuff of like stuff that people know is not necessarily good for them and they could benefit their lives by giving it up for a month. So that's what Lent is. And
Yeah.
so then St. Patty's Day was associated with like pretty much the breaking of your fasting from these certain things. And then at the end of your fast, you break your fast and you partake. So
Yeah.
that one is just like it's a partake, it's a celebration. And maybe that's the one thing that is a good question of like when you gave up these things but then at the end of it you're going to celebrate and like overindulge and
Yeah.
like that's something to be questionable with but we can't help it as human beings, but that is
Yeah.
definitely kind of like the big start of it, I think, of like, hey, let's party, like we made it through, type stuff. So and
Mhm.
then considering the history of the culture and what they've been through, well, yeah, of course they're going to celebrate. Look at all
Yeah.
we've been through. We made it through. We're here on St. Patty's Day, another year. Let's go ham.
Mhm.
So, or should I say, let's go corned beef.
Corned beef. Um, but I think with that said, I think that's all we have left for today.
Yeah, we made it an hour and 40 minutes. So,
Yeah.
uh, pretty hefty. I feel like
Yeah.
there's just so much stuff that we still could have covered. I know I had a
Yeah.
couple tabs open that we didn't even get into, but it's not even a big deal.
Yeah. I
Um,
always feel like we always talk about these subjects and they're like, oh, hopefully we can make it an hour. Hopefully, we can figure out something to talk about. But, there's always so much to the stories that, that when we start talking, we find these ideas that connect with other things like we've been saying this whole time. And then that leads into like a 10-minute tangent or a 15-minute tangent where, we're not talking about our central subject because we're talking about another religion where that central subject is called something else or
yeah,
something different.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, I suppose a great way to end this is happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody.
Yep. Yep.
Celebrate some Irish culture, watch an Irish movie, read an Irish book, listen to an Irish folk tale or an Irish jig, and just appreciate the culture in the past and
Yeah.
everything. It's the
And
best way to
respect the
say it.
culture too.
Yep.
Respect and appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So I think that'll do it for us.